if Oswald was still in front of his apartment house several minutes after 1:04, and if the Tippit shooting occurred a few minutes prior to 1:16 p.m. when the emergency transmission by Benavides was made, he could not possibly have been in a position to shoot the policeman. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess, Connell, and if you're new, then I would like to welcome you, and I also would like to earn your subscription. We are probably more than halfway through our walk through the Kennedy assassination right now, and we are trying to look at each element in chronological order so that we can better understand what's true, better understand what the quantity of research points to. And I had somebody ask me, are we going to look at the official story sometime? Are we going to look at, for example, Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed? And yes, I think we probably will at some point. But for this walkthrough, we are looking at the research, and we are looking step by step at what has come out through a variety of books and literature. So today we are looking at an article. Normally I have a book to hold up and show you guys, but for this one we are going to look at an article by Larry Harris. He was the researcher on the Tippit case, and we are going to be looking specifically at the murder of J.D. Tippit. Before we get into that, I want to let you know that in the next few episodes, we're going to look at Lee Oswald's time in custody. We're going to look at pictures, testimonies, and photographic evidence of his time in when he was in police custody. We are also going to be looking at, this is a book that I came across a few months ago, and it's by Michael Beschloss, and he goes through the Johnson White House tapes. But of course, the Johnson White House tapes started on, I believe, November 22nd, 1963, if not the 22nd, for sure on the 23rd. They were taping all phone calls at that point. So we are going to look at the first few phone calls from LBJ and what his response actually was according to the evidence. And we have other things coming up as well. Of course, Lee Oswald getting shot and then moving toward the Warren Commission. So that's what's coming up ahead. I also want to let you guys know, many of you have asked, I will be at the conferences in November here in the Dallas area. The Grodins sort of invited me to go back and forth with them. So that's what I plan to do. I'll be some at the JFK Historical Group. I'll actually be there on the Thursday. They've invited me to share. And so I'll be doing that on the Thursday for sure. And then we'll be back and forth between that and Lancer. And so you can see the show notes for more information. For Lancer, I do have a discount code for you. So if you're interested in going, you can get 10% off by using my code, which is JFK10. So I would love to see you at either one. I've had people say like, oh, I'd love to take a picture with you. And that's a new thing for me. So we'll all, I guess, enjoy that together. But I would love to meet you if you're a listener. And hope to have that chance in November. So those are the things that I wanted to say before we get into the article. But now we're going to go ahead and read this article. And I do have the original article printed out, but parts of it are hard to read if you find the copy online. And so there's someone who typed out the entire thing on a different forum. And so, you know, I'm just telling you that so that if you go to research this article yourself and you find the original, you will notice that, for example, some of the words are just faded out. Like they're hard to read. And so her typing it out was a service to all of us, really. I do want to thank Matt Douthit for recommending it to me. He is, along with Janet Grodin, he is somebody who currently is actively researching and better understanding the J.D. Tippit case. And so Matt Douthit, he has a YouTube channel that you can go and look at. And he is constantly adding conversations and debates there on his channel. And then Janet and I are going to be having a conversation soon where she's going to share some things about the J.D. Tippit case as well. Somebody asked about that in the comments, and I spoke with her about it, and she's happy to do it. So we're going to talk through things that she's learned about the J.D. Tippit case coming up sometime soon. But he is the one who recommended this article to me. It is called The Other Murder. It's from Dateline. Dallas was where it was published, and it's called November 22nd, 1963, The Other Murder, The Death of Officer Tippit Revisited by Larry Ray Harris. 30 years later, a number of misconceptions about the John Kennedy assassination still linger in the public mind. One of the most enduring is that investigators compiled a virtual open and shut case against Lee Harvey Oswald in the slaying of a Dallas policeman named J.D. Tippit, who was abruptly gunned down on a residential street 4 miles from Dealey Plaza less than an hour after JFK was shot. The widespread public acceptance of Oswald's guilt is such that the Tippit murder has been virtually relegated to a historical footnote. This was borne out by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that's the HSCA, whose 1979 final report devoted a scant 3 paragraphs to the policeman's death, concurring with the 1964 Warren Report conclusion that Oswald was a cop killer. More recently, attorney-author Gerald Posner's appalling new tome, Case Closed, glosses over the Tippit's murder case in just 7 pages. On the surface, and certainly as depicted by Warren Report groupies such as Gerald Posner and Jim Moore, the case against Oswald appeared to be airtight. But viewed objectively, thoughtfully, and in its entirety, the record leaves little doubt that someone other than Lee Oswald was responsible for the death of a Dallas cop. Let's take a look back at that other murder on November 22nd, 1963. Where was Oswald? The Warren Report said Oswald, afoot, left his rooming house in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas at 1:04 p.m. Police were notified of the shooting by a citizen using the radio in Tippit's squad car at 1:16 p.m. Therefore, this is according to the official record, the one that's accepted and that is purported by our government to be true. Oswald had no more than 12 minutes to walk from his apartment to the intersection of 10th and Patton, about 1 mile away. But Oswald's landlady, and here I want to say, Harris uses the term landlady throughout the article, so I will read it that way. However, that is a misrepresentation. She was not the landlady, she was the housekeeper, Earlene Roberts. The actual landlady was not present at the time. So this is one of those things that sometimes gets misrepresented, and there's even conversations about it in the early days. But regardless, Earlene Roberts was not the landlady, she was the housekeeper. Nevertheless, he writes, Oswald's landlady told the Secret Service that she looked out the window, quote, several minutes later, and observed Oswald standing motionless at the curb in front of the house. Therefore, several minutes after 1:04 p.m., several minutes later, Oswald was still lingering in the immediate vicinity of his rooming house. He adds parenthetically, perhaps he was waiting on the mysterious police car, which, according to the landlady's testimony, paused directly in front of 1026 North Beckley while Oswald was in his room, honked its horn twice, and drove away. So that's his thought, is perhaps he's waiting. I do want to point out that we have already, through our discussion of Forgive My Grief and our discussion of Hit List, we already went through Oswald's movements through the boarding house. So if you're wanting more information on that, we just did that in the last episode. This is really taking Oswald from the boarding house toward the murder scene or the Texas Theater, depending on what you actually suss out happened in these moments. But I just do want to let you know that that's what we already did if you're new to our readings. So the first point he's making is that the Warren Commission gives 12 minutes. But if we're given these 12 minutes, we actually need to adjust the first one closer because we lose a few minutes where she says several minutes after 104, he was still lingering. So it wasn't 104, it's several minutes after 104. So that's the first one. Now he's going to say, actually, this last one gets inched in further as well. So instead of having 12 minutes that are already pretty tight to make him get from point A to a mile away, point B, and also achieve a murder, that we don't actually have 12 minutes. We have several minutes off the front part, and he's about to tell us what's the next part that gets adjusted time-wise. Contrary to the Warren report's assertion that he rushed to Tippet's car and promptly notified police on Tippet's radio, Eyewitness Domingo Benavides testified that when the shooting began, he crouched down in the seat of his pickup truck and laid low for a few minutes. So we have several minutes on this side, and we have a few minutes on this side where he's in his truck. He's in his truck. Finally, he goes to Tippet and uses the radio. So we're losing a few minutes on either side. So we don't have 12 minutes. And whatever you do with several minutes and a few minutes, it's at least 4 or 5 minutes shorter. Our time has shrunk considerably from 12 to something like 6 or 8 minutes for Lee to have gone a mile and also had a lingering conversation with Tippet and also murdered him and gotten away before any of that happens. So that's a tight timeline. Let's keep reading. So he crouches down in the seat of his pickup truck and laid low for, quote, a few minutes because he was afraid that the gunman would reappear and start shooting again. And I want to point out this fits with logical human behavior. Put yourself in the seat of that pickup truck. You're right there. There is a murder of a police officer in front of your eyes. The guy just in cold blood goes around and takes a headshot. What are you going to do? You are going to do exactly this. So what he said fits precisely with what we know about just logic and human behavior and a natural trauma response. That as much as you might want to go and help the human being who had just been shot, your first inclination is there's danger right there. And those people are not afraid to use their weapons to kill humans. So I am going to act in self-preservation for the moment and make sure the coast is clear before I enter the scene and check on this other person. That's just normal human behavior. He says he was afraid that the gunman would reappear and start shooting again. Thus, a few minutes elapsed between the shooting and the time that police were notified at 1:16 p.m. We're told Benavides first tried to aid the mortally wounded officer before climbing into Tippet's squad car and fumbling with the radio microphone, trying to figure out how it worked. Contrary to the report which wrongly cited Benavides, it was a bystander named F. Bowley who took the microphone from him and called the dispatcher. Bowley's November 22nd affidavit said that he came upon the scene in his car, got out, and intentionally looked at his watch to note the time, 1:10 p.m. This is another indication that a few minutes, perhaps 5 or 6, elapsed before Bowley called the radio dispatcher. So what we're told here tightens our timeline even further. 1:04, he leaves. Several minutes later, he's still standing in the vicinity of the boarding house. 1:16 is when the call is made from the police dispatch. But what we have found out is that at 1:10 is when Bowley drives up and the scene has already happened. He's in his car, he gets out, he looks at his watch, it's 1:10. And then time passes before they call at 1:16. So we are talking about a smidgy few minutes at best if you are going to make the case that Lee Oswald was the one that shot Tippit. Let's keep reading. If Oswald was still in front of his apartment house several minutes after 1:04, and if the Tippit shooting occurred a few minutes prior to 1:16 p.m., when the emergency transmission by Benavides was made, he could not possibly have been in a position to shoot the policeman. This was demonstrated actually by Warren Commission Staff Attorney David Bellin, who was the most passionate advocate of Oswald's guilt for both JFK and Tippit. So this man purported that he was guilty of both crimes, and yet here's what he did. He retraced the accused assassin's presumed route with a stopwatch. It took him 17 minutes and 45 seconds. One has to wonder, why would Bellin possess these facts that this is the timeline? According to their timeline, right? This isn't, critics' timeline. The Warren Commission timeline is between 104 and 116. His own tracing of the route took 17 minutes and 45 seconds. Why would he possess these facts and still advocate for guilt? Moreover, the Warren report said that Oswald was walking east on 10th Street when Tippit encountered him, but contemporaneous written reports filed by the Dallas Police Department, FBI, and Secret Service all stated that the pedestrian who shot Tippit was walking west on 10th Street. So the Warren report says he's going east. The actual evidence indicates that the shooter was going west on 10th Street and continued west after the shooting. I'm going to put up a map of the Tippit crime scene. Of course, I'm looking in my Grodin book. This one is The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald by Robert Grodin. He has a map of the killing right here at 10th and Patton. He has where the squad car was. He has where the various houses are. And you can see on this one that there's the picture of Tippit's there. Benavides is just very close. And then you have people like Helen Markham standing up here and others. We have this woman, if you remember, named Aquila Clemens. We're going to talk about her testimony as well. This is a recreation of what the murder looked like. And I'm just going to leave these up for a minute because it's very interesting. It shows a pedestrian was walking, then comes and speaks inside the window, and then shoots across the car, and then comes around and does the coup de grace headshot. So that is the order of events that witnesses saw. That is the Tippit murder. So the Warren report said that Oswald was walking east, but the written report said he was going west. Oswald could not have been walking west on 10th Street because he would have been coming back toward his rooming house from a point beyond the crime scene that he could not possibly have reached in the established time frame. So this is just another point in favor of Oswald's innocence in this murder, that the person was coming from the west. Everybody said so, that he's coming west. But the Warren Commission report said he was coming from the east. And the reason why is because that's the only logical position that could possibly have had Oswald coming from it. Otherwise, you need to add more time. If he's walking west, then that adds even more time to the walking. If you're going with the evidence that everyone said, the contemporaneous reports from the Dallas PD, FBI, and Secret Service that said that a pedestrian who shot Tippit was walking west on 10th Street, if you're going to have that be what you go with, the actual evidence from the day of, then it's even less time that Oswald has available to him. We've already come several minutes off the front. Now we've seen that several minutes off the back are not available to us anymore if we're going to go with the evidence. Now we need to add even more minutes because he was going west rather than going east, which is what the natural direction would have been from his rooming house. A resident in the next block named Jimmy Burt later told independent researchers, including this author, that he noticed the man walking west on 10th Street just moments before the shooting. Burt said he was certain it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Finally, two witnesses, Butch Burroughs and Jack Davis, have said they observed Oswald inside the Texas Theater as early as 1:15 p.m., much earlier than the Warren report timetable. Burroughs, who was working the concession counter, remembered waiting on Oswald. If correct, their accounts provide additional corroboration that Oswald was nowhere near 10th and Patton when Tippit was slain. Witnesses, the key three. Helen Markham was the sole basis for the report's conclusion that Oswald was walking east on 10th. She alone said the Tippet's killer, identified by her in a lineup as Oswald, was walking east when the police car approached him from behind. Thus, Markham became the cornerstone of the case against Oswald, elevating her status to star witness for the Dallas Police Department and the Warren Commission. Hysterical and fainting, she is said to have picked Oswald from a police lineup, even though, listen to this, the day of the assassination, the day of Tippit's murder, this is the account that she gave. She told the FBI on November 22nd that Tippit's assailant was 18, red complexed, and had black wavy hair. Let's note that Oswald was 24, fair-skinned, and had receding brown hair. 18, red complexed. I don't know if that's her usage or just a misprint here, but it actually fits with the way that she speaks. If you ever listen to an interview of her, people talked about her, we're going to hear about it in a minute, as an utter screwball. And that he had black wavy hair. That was her initial description. Ask yourself, does that fit? 18, red complected with black wavy hair. Is that how you would describe Oswald? Maybe, maybe not. You get to decide. Descriptions of Tippit's killer that were broadcast all over the Dallas Police Department radio also had references to black hair. Publicly, the Warren Report called Markham's bizarre testimony reliable. But behind the scenes, the panel knew that their star witness was a walking, talking disaster. An unpublished commission memo summarizing Markham's deposition warned this way. Listen to this. This witness is very unsure of herself on most points. Can you imagine resting your whole case on somebody who you describe that way? You yourself are describing her this way. This isn't somebody else trying to trash your star witness. This is your own assessment of her. She's the one person who has Oswald walking in the direction that you need him to walk. And you say this witness is very unsure of herself on most points. It's pretty humorous. So unsure, in fact, that she earned the contempt of Commission staff attorneys Joseph Ball, who complained that her account was full of mistakes. That's a quote. And utterly unreliable. So one of the staff attorneys for the Warren Commission described her in those terms, full of mistakes and utterly unreliable. So there's one witness upon whom the Warren Commission case against Lee Harvey Oswald in the murder of J.D. Tippit rests. And this is their description of her. The other one, Wesley Liebler, dismissed her story as contradictory and worthless. So that's the way they assessed their star witness. Several years later, Ball, Joseph Ball, one of the commission staff attorneys, he derided Markham publicly during a debate, calling her, quote, an utter screwball, end quote. Assistant counsel Norman Redlick's hear no evil response to his colleagues is, quote, the commission wants to believe Mrs. Markham, and that's all there is to it. So he rightly assesses they want to believe her. That's all there is to it. So it's not that she's believable. It's not that she's reliable. It's not that she makes no mistakes. It's not that she doesn't contradict herself. It's not that she's not an utter screwball. It's they want to believe her, and that's that. Not a good case for your star witness. William Scoggins. So this is another key witness. William Scoggins purportedly picked Oswald out of a boisterous police lineup on November 23rd, long after the suspect had been formally charged with the officer's murder. But an FBI report reveals that 2 days later, when FBI agents showed him a photograph of Oswald, Scoggins told them he couldn't be sure the person he observed on November 22nd was actually identical with Oswald. Later, he sheepishly admitted to the Warren Commission that when the FBI showed him pictures of several different people, including the accused assassin, he picked out a man other than Oswald as the Tippit gunman. That's telling. when he had a clip of different photos, he chose a different man. And then we have Domingo Benavides. He's the one that we talked about that crouched down in the seat of his truck. He was the closest person to the shooting. He said he was in his truck a mere 15 feet away. Yet he was not taken to any of the lineups to see if he could identify the man. So he's the closest one to the shooting. He wasn't even brought in. His Warren Commission appearance elicited only a tentative identification. He could say only that a picture of Oswald he saw on TV resembled the man who shot Tippit. Here's the thing. If you witness a murder and then the guy immediately is taken into custody and he's splashed all over national news, would you be able to say, yeah, they got him, same guy? Or would you say he resembled the man? That's him, the police lineups. And I do want to say at the beginning that actually our next episode is going to be a look at whether or not the Oswald lineups were valid. So this isn't all we're going to get, but we are going to get a little taste of the police lineups. And here's a description. The Dallas police lineups, all four of them, were a travesty. In the first two, the disheveled and bruised Oswald was paraded before witnesses, including Markham, accompanied by two detectives and a jail clerk who were neatly attired in slacks and dress shirts. The fourth and final lineup, the next day, attended by Scoggins, was even more outrageous. Oswald, two teenagers, and a Hispanic man. Further, throughout at least three of the lineups, Oswald was loudly and angrily protesting the unfairness of the procedure and demanding legal representation. Which, by the way, we could take that and we could go, what an argumentative man. He was arguing for the very things that he should have been arguing for. And in fact, after this case, we get things like Miranda rights, right? The things being read that you have the right to an attorney. You have the right to know that anything you say or do can be used against you in a court of law. All those things that now must be told to every person who is arrested for a crime like this. The Miranda rights must be read. That wasn't the case at this time. And so he is arguing, he is being argumentative for the very rights that he should possess in that moment. He should not have to go into any police interrogations or any procedures like this without having been advised by a lawyer. He's asking for the right thing. So when he's being loud and noisy, he's being loud and noisy for the very things he had a right to. So being loud and noisy isn't something that we can say, well, see, he's guilty because he's angry. No, he's angry about something that it's right to be angry about because you're an American citizen with rights. So he's in a lineup with Oswald, two teenagers, and a Hispanic man. And throughout these, at least three of the lineups, Oswald was loudly and angrily protesting the unfairness of it and demanding legal representation. One witness, William Whaley, a taxi driver, made the observation that, quote, anybody who wasn't sure could have picked out the right one just for that. Obviously. Yeah, if you have three guys who are just kind of bored and standing there, and then a guy who's like clearly red-faced and frustrated because he's just been denied legal representation and he's being forced to go into a police lineup with people who look nothing like him, and he's got a bruised eye and a cut-up face, which he did. Let's look at this photo. He had a bloody face, a black eye. He looks scruffy at this point. He looks guilty, right? They made him look like an angry, guilty, ridiculous man. And then you got two people standing there in business suits and a teenager or a Hispanic guy, people who look nothing like him. That would make me angry. What about you? Three individuals not known to the Warren Commission later offered wildly variant accounts of the shooting and its immediate aftermath. Aquila Clemens, who was at 327 East 10th, she was on the block. She was a housekeeper. She said she heard gunshots and she went out to see what was going on. And she saw two men running from the scene in opposite directions. If you look at Mark Lane's interview of her, which I encourage you to do, she is a very clear witness. She's an older black woman who I believe was keeping house for someone there on the block. And she says she came outside, she heard the gunshots, came outside, and she ran back down the street where he was lying. And I looked at him, is what she said. She says she saw a man with a gun reloading it. She says the man with the gun was chunky, kind of short, kind of heavy, not a very big guy. Those are all quotes from her. Chunky, kind of short, kind of heavy, not very big guy. And she says there was a second man who was tall and thin. And the first man with the gun told him to go on, go on. That's how she says it in her. She says, but I think she's imitating him. She says, go on. He told him to go on. So go on down the alley is what he's saying. And that they went in different directions. She says the tall, thin man was in light khakis and a white shirt, and he went straight down 10th Street. She said later a man came to her home, talked to her with a gun 2 days after the shooting, and, quote, said I might get hurt. Someone might hurt me if I talk about what I saw. So she hadn't talked to anybody until she spoke with Mark Lane, and then she disappeared, and there's no more records of her. There's no one else who talks to her. She doesn't get to talk to any more researchers, I don't believe. I think after this, she disappears. And I don't know if that's because she was silenced or if because she basically silenced herself by giving this testimony very clearly on video and then going and, maybe living with a relative in some other place under a different name. I don't know. But there's no more records of her. So you can watch that. It's a very interesting Mark Lane interview. Then we have Frank Wright. This is another individual not sought out by the Warren Commission. He lived in the next block. He said he heard gunshots. He went out to see what was happening and he saw a man standing near a police car. He insisted that the man ran and jumped in a gray car parked beyond the cruiser and sped away on 10th Street. That is different from any account that we've heard, but it's part of the array of testimonies. And this is why we listen to a variety of witnesses, because it's possible, right, that Aquila Clemens comes out, sees part of it, and hurries back inside. And maybe he sees that he gets in the thing, or maybe he made something up, or maybe he misunderstood what was happening. There's lots of potential when we're dealing with eyewitnesses. Are they putting things together that weren't there? Somebody else ran out of his house and got into his car to try to get away. We don't know. I don't think he knows. But our point in reading and listening to a variety of witnesses is that then we're not all wholly dependent on one screwball testimony. We're not lying everything on Helen Markham. We're not lying everything on Aquila Clemens. We're not looking at any one testimony. We're trying to see what does the whole assortment of testimonies point to as fact. So that's what he saw. He says the man ran and jumped in a gray car. So this is just a man he saw standing near a police car. Again, was this William Scoggins? Was this Domingo Benavides, who maybe runs and gets in his own car? We don't know, right? We don't know what time point Frank Wright shows up. But that's his testimony. Jack Tatum told House Assassination Committee investigators that he was driving west on 10th and had just passed a police car when the shooting broke out. So he's up in front of where the police car was. Tatum paused and watched the gunman walk behind the squad car and take careful, deliberate aim before firing one more shot into Tippit. This action, the HSCA report noted, which is commonly described as a coup de grace, is more indicative of an execution than an act of defense intended to allow escape or prevent apprehension. So the coup de grace shot is straight to the head. There had already been multiple shots to the torso. One could assume he would be dead. The headshot is to ensure death. Absent further evidence, which the committee did not develop, the meaning of this evidence of the fourth shot remains uncertain. These seemingly irreconcilable accounts only add to the mystery and serve to reiterate that official investigators and independent researchers don't really know just what transpired at 10th and Patton that day. And here's one of the real issues with this, is that once they had Oswald in the Dallas Police Department and they're talking about he murdered the president, this murder kind of just gets lost in the shuffle. That they did not pursue. You think about the murder of a policeman. How many weeks or months or years would you expect for there to be careful evidence gathering? At least weeks or months, right? You would want careful evidence gathering, following up on every witness, making sure you understand the nature of it. What was the relationship between the two? There was a report of a second man. Where'd that guy go and who was he? We're going to track down every bit of evidence because a policeman was shot. And so we want to be faithful to follow this up. He's shot in the middle of the day in cold blood. So you'd expect weeks or months, certainly, of faithful evidence gathering, witness, seeking, maybe notices in the paper. If you saw this or had any information, please contact this number. Instead, you have this murder where the trail runs cold. They don't seek out everything because it's an issue just like with the president. Once we've decided we have our guy, we're not going to search for any evidence that would possibly make that start to turn gray. We just want it to be real black and white. So we're just going to stick with the official story and kind of shut the case. Case closed, right? The next subheading is 4 + 4 equals a slight problem. 4 bullets were removed from Tippet's body, and 4 empty shell casings were reportedly found at the scene of his death. Investigators should have had no problem matching them up to indisputably establish Oswald's guilt. But the bullets taken from Oswald's body could not be traced to Oswald's revolver. According to an FBI expert, the barrel of the pistol which fired the bullets, allegedly Oswald's .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, had been modified, causing the bullets to pass erratically through the barrel, thereby leaving inconsistent individual characteristics, which made positive identification impossible. Years later, in the late 1970s, the HSCA was still unable to positively connect any of the bullets to Oswald's pistol, even with sophisticated techniques that were not available in 1964. So 4 bullets, none of them can be traced to Oswald's revolver. And they're saying that this revolver had been modified and it caused bullets to pass erratically, randomly. Every time they fire, they make different marks. Nothing that can be given any characteristic expectation of, hey, every time we shoot a bullet, this shows up on the bullet. None of that. Moreover, 3 of the bullets were manufactured by Western Winchester and 1 by Remington. But 2 of the shell casings were made by Western Winchester and 2 were made by Remington Peters. The report was unable to adequately explain this curious discrepancy, which staff attorney Melvin Eisenberg delicately described as a slight problem when he broke the news to commission's executive members. Here's what I did, you guys. When I read articles like this and I need help, and it's not just articles, I do this with my Bible study as well. And many of you have said, like, wow, you do such a good job breaking down facts. Well, the way that I learned to do this is with Bible study. I just map things out in my head. I make lists or I draw pictures so that I understand it, because essentially I view these articles kind of like math. If you don't understand addition, you can't really move on to multiplication. And if you don't understand addition and multiplication, you can't really move on to algebra, right? You have to build on top of one another, and you really shouldn't move past something if you don't understand it. So that's how I view these articles, is if I hit a point and I'm like, okay, wait, Winchester Westerns, or Western, I'm even saying that wrong, Western Winchesters and Remington Peters, blah, 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 there's 4, there's 3, there's 2, I don't know what's going on. Here's what I did. I drew it out. So there's 3 that are Western Winchesters that are the bullets. 1 that's a Remington Peters. But then for the casings, there's 2 Western Winchesters and 2 that are Remington Peters. They do not match one another. And the staff attorney said this presents a slight problem for us. In the final analysis, the 4-shell casings, so we're talking about these right here, the 4-shell casings are the only tangible evidence linking Oswald's pistol to the Tippit murder. Without question, these 4 casings were fired in his .38 Smith & Wesson. When they were fired is another matter altogether. So they can prove that they were fired from his .38 Smith & Wesson, those 4 casings. But notice they don't match the 4 bullets that were found in Tippit. There is reason to wonder if the shells turned over to the Warren Commission were the same shells found at the scene on November 22nd. And I wrote outside, what? No photos? But of course, here Robert Groden helps us. We do have 4 bullet shells that are claimed to be the ones that were found at the Tippit killing scene. And he points out the physical difference between, which we're about to get into, the shells for a revolver, which is here, and an automatic pistol, which is here. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. But you can see there's a definite difference. We are going to get some more information about the shell casings and why there's questions about it. So hold that thought. But the second description of the suspect that was broadcast over police radio that day said the gunman was apparently armed with a .32 caliber dark finish automatic pistol. That's why that bullet difference that I just pointed out is significant. That Oswald's gun was a revolver. The broadcast over the police radio was that he had been shot with an automatic pistol. A few minutes later, Sergeant Jerry Hill notified the DPD radio dispatcher, quote, "The shell at the scene indicates that the suspect is armed with a .38 automatic rather than a pistol. Note that there are only 2 types of a handgun, automatic and revolver. Both are pistols. So it's very likely that Hill meant to say an automatic rather than a revolver. Oswald's gun is a revolver, not an automatic. So was Tippit slain with an automatic handgun, as those 2 radio transmissions indicate? This is very important. Was he with an automatic or with Oswald's revolver? The 2 cannot both be true. If so, Oswald was not the killer. He was allegedly carrying a revolver, which fires ammunition of a different size and shape than that made for an automatic. An automatic automatically ejects the shells as the bullets are fired. Revolver shells must be ejected manually. Anyone with a passing familiarity with handguns could distinguish between an automatic and a revolver ammunition at a glance. Would a seasoned police sergeant like Jerry Hill, investigating the murder of a brother police officer, make such a misidentification? That's a really good point. If he wants to find the guy, which we can assume he does, he's a brother policeman, and as we've read in other places, these policemen were probably more angry about J.D. Tippit's murder than about the president's murder, because they were probably right-wing leaning Dallas residents who had anger and resentment towards the president. That was the prevailing attitude among this class of police officers at the time. So they would be more angry about Tippit's murder. So he would have been even more on the money with the particular identification of items in this murder scene. Uncertainty about the Tippit ballistics evidence grows with the revelation that Dallas policeman J.M. Poe, who took custody of 2 shell casings on November 22nd, was later unable to identify them. Patrolman Poe was instructed by Sergeant Hill at the scene to mark 2 shells that were found by Domingo Benavides. So 2 of these shells, he's supposed to put his J.M. Poe, he's supposed to put his initials on the casing. He scratched his initials on them to establish a chain of evidence. This is a common police procedure if you're not familiar. It's something I've learned through this case, is that a lot of times people will make some sort of unique mark so that then later they are able in a court of law or in whatever position they're in later to pick it up and say, yep, that's the one. Those are my initials right there. That's the exact bullet that I found that day. Because you're dealing with cases all the time, and it might be months until you're back in court over something that happened many months ago. So you make a distinct mark, and then later you can identify it and say, yep, that's the one. So he did that. He scratches his initials, but 7 months later, FBI agents asked Poe to examine the 4 shells turned over to the Warren Commission. The FBI report told the tale. Poe stated he recalled marking these cases, but he stated after a thorough examination of the 4 cartridges that were shown to him on June 12, 1964, he cannot locate his marks. Therefore, he cannot positively identify any of these cartridges as being the same ones he received from Benavides. So we call this evidence tampering. This is evidence that something has changed between November to June, which would be a very typical timeline for a court case. It's often the case that once you go through discovery and you go through whatever kind of depositions and police investigation, and the person has sat in jail or sometimes has been put out on bail, it might be many months later. So this is not atypical. It's not like the bullet is going to break down in 7 months or something. His scratch on the end of the bullet should still be there. And it's not. He can't, when he looks at them, he says, he looks at all 4. He's supposedly marked 2 of them. He looks at all 4 and doesn't see his mark on any of the shell casings. All of this suggests the possibility of police tampering with evidence to prop up a hastily contrived, shoddy case against a hapless suspect. Coupled with the utter lack of any other credible evidence implicating Oswald, it raises the specter of a classic police frame-up. And you need to know, if you're not familiar with them, that this is actually a common to this era Dallas Police Department tactic. Many other people have indicated that Dallas police was very corrupt, very apt to go along with bribery, that there were all sorts of misfits and mishappenings in the Dallas Police Department during this time. So the fact that there's a police frame-up is pretty common for Dallas Police Department in this era. Next, we're told about the jacket that didn't fit. Police found a white jacket on a parking lot behind a nearby gas station. The jacket eventually turned over by police to the FBI and Warren Commission was gray. So they found a white jacket. The Dallas police turn over a jacket that's gray to the FBI and the Warren Commission. The Warren report flatly stated that this jacket, which was given the number Commission Exhibit 162, belonged to Oswald and was discarded by him as he fled the scene of Tippet's death. The few known references to the jacket that weekend called it white. CE 162 is officially a gray zipper jacket. I have held this jacket at the National Archives, and it is gray. Conceivably, one might call it light gray, but no one, least of all a trained policeman, would call it white. A commercial laundry tag stapled in the jacket was never traced to Oswald. Unpublished FBI reports disclose an investigation requested by the Warren Commission in which all dry cleaning firms in the Dallas-Fort Worth and New Orleans areas were contacted without identifying the one which laundered the garment. The Warren report didn't mention the laundry tag or the unsuccessful effort to trace it. Now, what you need to know is Lee Oswald was ostensibly a poor man. According to their evidence, now, this is not the evidence that indicates he was actually intelligence and probably running many different operations at the same time with the FBI and the CIA. But take that out of it. If you take their case, he's a poor man. He's sort of a misfit. He, is off trying to get jobs, can't get work, finally works at the Texas School Book Depository at the kind benevolence of Mrs. Paine. If that's the case, remember that he doesn't drive. How in the world is this poor man who doesn't drive able to somehow get his jacket to a dry cleaner that cannot be identified? Not in Dallas, not in Fort Worth, not in New Orleans, nowhere that he's supposedly been in the last 6 or 10 months. Can they locate the dry cleaner who cleaned this dry clean only jacket that a poor man is wearing. The same FBI investigation determined that Marina Oswald hand washed all of her husband's clothing, including 2 jackets, and that she never knew him to use a commercial cleaner. Also, you guys, CE-162 was a medium. All of Oswald's other clothing was a small. Now, I want to let you guys know, I have a lot of sons, okay? A lot of sons. And I have a husband who, for ages and ages and ages, wore mediums. That's what he wore always, was a medium. About a year ago, a little more than a year ago, he went through cancer and chemo. Mercifully, he's free of it. Prior to that point, he had actually discovered that he was gluten-free. So he cut out gluten, then he went through chemo. He is now a very clear small. We had to get rid of all of his mediums. When he wears them, he looks ridiculous. They're way too big for him. He can't wear his mediums anymore. He has to wear a small. My point is this. Of all of my young adult sons, who have all gone from small to now they're in mediums, it's a very big difference. You might think small and medium doesn't make a difference. For a man with a frame that all of his clothings are in small, he's not going to buy a medium jacket. None of this fits, is what I'm trying to tell you. That this jacket that they say, oh, it was discarded because he was in a hurry after the Tippit, it doesn't make sense. All of his other clothing was a small. All of them. Marina washed his clothes. He wasn't a rich man going around dry cleaning. Like anyone who's in my, class, I grew up really pretty poor. And then now I'm middle class, but I'm middle class with a large family. So we do not do dry clean only. I don't have time, money, or patience for that. When I worked in Washington, D.C., I had business suits and we would dry clean them. That is the only time in my life when I have gone to a dry cleaner because I just can't afford to. I can't afford to have the kind of clothes that would need to be sent off to the cleaners. We wear clothes that are wash and wear, and that's what we do. She never knew him to go to a dry cleaner, a commercial cleaner. None of this evidence fits. It's not Lee Harvey Oswald's jacket, you guys. It's nonsense. This piece of evidence that supposedly links him to the crime is a bunch of baloney. Somebody who only owns smalls. All of his other clothing was size small. Doesn't buy a medium jacket. Doesn't fit. This detail doesn't fit at all. Dallas police crowed all weekend about each new development, however circumstantial or tentative, in the case against Oswald. But they were strangely silent about the jacket. Nor is it mentioned anywhere in the dozens of police reports that are published in the report's 26-volume appendix. A police captain was erroneously credited with finding the jacket, but he explicitly testified he didn't find it. So the person who was credited with finding it said he didn't find it. And there is no report from number 279, the unknown officer who called the radio dispatcher to report his discovery. So the officer who it was credited to said he did not find it. And no one can say who this police officer, number 279, that said, oh, we found a jacket. Nobody can even figure out who he was. In 1978, I identified and attempted to interview this officer who responded angrily when I asked what color the jacket was. So Larry Harris is telling us, he found the officer, he identified him, he reached out to him for contact, and when he asked what color the jacket was, this officer responded angrily and said, quote, that information might be something they don't want given out. Then he terminated our brief conversation. So that's what happened in 1978. This author, Larry Harris, is telling us he identified the officer, and the officer got angry and said that information might be something they don't want given out, meaning the color of the jacket. Why? Because they found a white jacket. The one that was entered into evidence was a gray jacket. Why did they change it up? Was the original jacket his? If it was, they would have put it into evidence. So nobody can find the officer that was responsible for it. He says, no, it wasn't me. They didn't identify who it was that put it into evidence. And then when he is tracked down, he gets angry and says, they don't want me giving out information about that. This whole thing stinks. According to a Secret Service report, Oswald, quote, complained of a lineup wherein he had not been granted a request to put on a jacket similar to those worn by some of the other individuals in the lineup. And Larry Harris asks, why would Oswald want to wear a jacket if he had discarded the one he was wearing when he shot Tippit? If he shot a man in a jacket and gets rid of it, then when you're standing there in the lineup, you don't go, could I have a jacket to wear? Because you don't want to look anything like you did when you shot the guy. Instead, Oswald is saying, hey, these other guys are able to wear jackets. Could I wear a jacket also? So that I don't look so out of place, that I don't identify myself by being so different from them. But if you had gotten rid of a jacket to try to look different, you just shot a guy, you're just trying to shake up the way you look so that somebody can't point you out, then you don't go to the lineup and say, hey, could I have a jacket? It's a good observation. Dallas Police Department, FBI, and Secret Service reports detailing interrogations of Oswald do not mention a jacket. Nothing in the official record indicates that he was questioned about or confronted with the white jacket by his hosts. And Larry Harris points out he was confronted with the infamous backyard photos of himself holding the rifle. They had that evidence and they brought it to him and asked about it. I'm sure we'll get into this when we go into the part about Oswald in custody. But when they confronted him about the backyard photos, he said, that's not me. My head has been superimposed on the body. I do photographic work. That's not, I can tell that's not proper. But they didn't bring him the jacket and say, is this yours? Would you try it on for us, please? How long have you owned the jacket? Etc. They don't even bring up the jacket. Only one of 6 witnesses shown the gray jacket stated positively that it was the one worn by Tippit's killer. Their descriptions of the gunman's jacket varied, and in several instances were significantly inconsistent with the commissioned garment. Oswald's landlady, that would be Earlene Roberts, she was the housekeeper. At least he's been consistent throughout the article. This was an error that he made, and there it is. It's in the article. The landlady could not identify CE 162 as the one he was wearing when he left his room at 104. So Earlene Roberts could not identify this as the jacket that he was wearing. There was no credible evidence whatsoever that CE 162 belonged to Oswald and was abandoned by him near 10th and Patton. So none of the evidence at all links the jacket to Oswald. So then who shot JD? We're down to the very end of the article, and here's his conclusion. He says, after 30 years, that remains a valid question in the estimation of this writer. The information set forth above is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Virtually every aspect of the official case against Oswald in the Tippit murder is tainted or flawed or outright undermined by the known facts, evidence, and testimony. Other anomalies surrounding the policeman's death are too numerous to outline here. They include the circumstances which brought Tippit to the quiet residential street where he died, miles from his own patrol district. We talked about that in our last episode. Why was he north of the district he was supposed to be patrolling? Why did he lie about his whereabouts? And then why was he frantically running around up there in the district where he wasn't supposed to be and not in the district where he said he was? But also his activities in the hour preceding his murder is a weird set of circumstances. And an aspect of Tippit's personal life, which, had it been known to investigators in 1964, might have cast the officer's demise in a different light altogether. Now, this is just inferring that there's some other evidence that ought to be known about the case. He's saying there's an aspect of his personal life, which I think refers to affairs, which might have cast the officer's demise in a different light altogether. Unfortunately, the truth about Tippit's death may never be known because of the unbelievably shoddy and dubious case concocted by the Dallas police and its endorsement by myopic government investigators. The record of J.D. Tippit's murder is inaccurate and incomplete. At least to those with open minds, the strange death of a policeman on November 22, 1963 seems destined to remain that date's other unsolved murder. So that is the article from JFK, Dateline, Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, The Other Murder. This is the official way that this article looks. So if you're looking for it online, that's the one that you're looking for. But let me know what you think about this whole Oswald Tippit connection. Do you see a connection? Did the shrinking of the timeline help you understand just how tight and tenuous the Warren Commission case is against Oswald? Did the problems with the ballistics make you kind of look sideways at the case? What about the jacket? All of those things. And then you bring in the eyewitnesses, like the guys who place him in the theater even earlier than the Warren Commission reports. There's a lot there. There's a lot to consider when we talk about the Tippit case, but I hope this has given you some good food for thought, a little bit deeper understanding of that particular case. What it does for me, I'll tell you, you guys have heard me express this, I believe, in other situations, but I have a real heart for justice. And the more that I look at this, the more angry I am that he was done a disservice. That just like we've talked about with Kennedy, we're talking about the murder of a human being. And we as a society have decided that this is a crime that we are going to punish at the highest possible ways. Some states still enact the death penalty for murder, but certainly we don't just say, slap on the wrist, you're done. And we don't accuse someone without credible evidence. We certainly don't convict or jail or execute them without a massive amount of evidence distinctly connecting their person to the crime scene, to the crime weapon. We want a motive. We want to make sure we can connect it all so we don't wrongly accuse a different human being and thus strip him of his rights without due process, without justice on his side. We want to make sure that we're doing justice to the original person and their loss of life, and we want to make sure that we're doing justice to the one who has been accused. And in this case, the more that I look at the evidence, the more angry I am that Lee Oswald has been convicted without evidence and done away with because he's wiped off the earth within 2 days of J.D. Tippit's murder, but also that we failed J.D. Tippit by not sufficiently investigating his death so that the right person could be convicted for that crime. Let me hear your thoughts. I always love to hear your thoughts. If you have articles and additional information, leave it in the comments. I look forward to that. If you haven't checked them out, make sure you go back and see the talk that we did with Pat Hall at the 1026 North Beckley boarding house, especially after this whole conversation. You'll want to check that out. It was fascinating. So go and listen to that. It is definitely worth your time. I think it's a really fun walk through the boarding house and talk with Miss Pat Hall. She was the granddaughter of the actual landlady, not the housekeeper, Earlene Roberts, who was there that day, but the landlady who owned it. Her granddaughter still runs it. And so we talked with her. So you'll want to look at that. And then if you missed the release that I did last week of Dealey Plaza with the Grodins, be sure you go back to that. That's a really special video to me. And I also think I keep getting the feedback from viewers that it's a really good look at Dealey Plaza, that it gives you a look from a lot of different angles. So I think even if you put the video on silent and you just enjoyed the visual aspect, I think there's a lot of different views of the plaza that have been helpful for those who are familiar with the case and yet go, you know what, I've never seen the plaza from that angle. So if you're one of those people who may never get to visit Dealey Plaza, that's one you're going to want to check out. So those are a couple of plugs for videos that might be of interest to you, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you back soon. Bye.